it's done. So while other people are joining, I wish that you all had a fantastic summer in spite of everything. Please say yes. Okay, you don't say yes.
Yes.
Okay, you had a decent summer then. Okay, so the idea of this initial webinar that we are having is that it is the lesson from COVID is that, of course, all public administration have shown some more, some less, but in general, yes, capability to continue working with normal operation in spite of people changing the office where they work and staying at home, etc., etc. But it is, of course, something which has shown, on one hand, that technology allows to do that easily. At the same time, it is the normal way of working, just putting people remotely, which makes things sometimes easier, sometimes more difficult. But overall, it has limits, and it shows also vulnerabilities and somehow breakdown of some services. So the idea is that, as we all know, now, in spite of the very bad time we had got all together, we have now a unique opportunity to take advantage of that experience. And all local governments and governments in general and industries in general, but we are looking for local governments, of course, have the opportunity to rethink and redesign the way they work, the priorities, and the role of smart cities. Now, one thing which strikes me is that everybody is talking about smart working, which is okay, but this is not smart working. This is just the same work as in the office, but working remotely. So changing, redesigning the way people work, the priorities and the role of smart cities, this could be a very important opportunity. And another point is that, assuming that this transformation is taking place, there might be a major impact in introduction of new technologies and of new governance models, like introducing artificial intelligence solutions, like exploiting extensively big data and IoT, etc., and blockchain and so on. And so this shows that it is even more important that we take care about something which we all know, but somehow it was not at the center of our attention, which is digital ethics and digital humanism, which are somehow similar, but we will talk about it during this webinar, and about governance of these major evolutions. So there are a lot of opportunities and also threats about it, and and so I will start sharing my chart. Where is it? Here it is. Share application. Okay, can you see the chart? I hope so. So the topic of today is about digital ethics and humanism, and it's about laying the foundation for rethinking cities. So there are a lot of consequences of just a few words I said, but there is something that must be taken care, and many topics, and these ones are, in my opinion, and I think we all share this, quite relevant. So it is about digitalization that is opening unprecedented opportunities and also raising serious concerns. And serious concerns can be about many things, about what happens in the social networks, what happens about privacy, what happens about telesurveillance, and so on and so on. So we will have today, differently from what I announced before, 2 speakers instead of 3. The third one couldn't make it. The first topic will be managed by Sam Smith. It will be about digital ethics, health and well-being, its cities and communities in their place. Sam is president of Sokitim, which is one of our dearest member, head of IT and digital for the 3 cities ICT, and strategic IT lead for Cambridgeshire County and Peterborough City Council. So when you introduce yourself, Sam, you will say it much better than me. And then Christopher Fahrenberger, he is senior researcher at Human-Computer Interaction Group at the Vienna Technical University. So this is all I wanted to say. As usual, this is not a formal presentation. You can raise your hand. You can keep the questions for the end of each presentation or for the discussion at the end. Please be provocative. Whatever you say is welcome. If you disagree, or you are welcome to disagree and tell us why, and so that we can open a discussion. Okay, so I think I've done. So Sam, if you wish, you can show your presentation and introduce yourself better than I did. Okay. Hello, Dean.
Hi. You're on mute.
Okay, I've muted everybody except you, Sam. I have a look.
That better now? Can you hear me okay?
Okay, you can start.
Okay, you can hear me this time.
Yeah. So don't forget that nobody here is from UK except a few guys. So please, we are not so good in English as you are. Speak slowly if you can. Okay.
I will do. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the topic today is digital ethics, health and well-being, communities and cities in their place, and that's the session today. So there is some background noise coming in from somewhere, Georgia.
Yes, I will mute everybody.
Okay. That's better. So the session is going to be about digital ethics and the role that they play in improving the health and well-being of our communities and our cities. And just to start with some topical references in terms of where we are now. There's some slides on the screen. So ethics and digital health and well-being spans diverse places. There are some examples on the screen. I've got the Black Lives Matter, and the reality there is that systemic racial bias is being built into applications.
Sorry, Sam, can you put your presentation full screen if possible?
I thought it was. Okay, it's on the slide. It's on.
Okay, it is full screen. Okay, sorry.
Can you see the notes as well, or can you just see the slide? Oh, sorry, you're on mute now.
Yourself.
Sorry, Giorgio, you were on mute just then. I didn't catch what you said.
No, it's okay. Sorry, I interrupted you. I did a mess. Don't worry.
That's fine. Can you see the slides? Okay, though.
Yeah, we can see it. It's a little bit small, but we can see it.
We can see the
see notes as well, Sam.
Ah, interesting. Even though it's on slideshow format. Interesting.
Have you got 2 screens running?
I have got 2 screens running.
I think it's doing the other one.
That's helpful of it. So let's try. Can you still see the notes as well there?
Look, there is on the bottom of your screen. Yes. There is a screen. If you put on it, if you click on it, you will have it full screen. Can you see it just below your picture?
Just below my picture.
Yes, you have a chart. and below that you have there is a pen, and then there is a magnifier, and then there is a screen. I think this one would allow you to put it full screen, isn't it?
So that one there.
Yeah, yeah. No.
So that didn't. I just tried that before. That didn't make it.
Okay, don't worry. You tell us what is written, then they will get the charts. Everybody will get the charts anyway.
How's that? Is that better?
This is okay now. Perfect.
Great. That's great. Except I can't see my notes, so we'll be winging it slightly from that point of view. So bear with me 1 second while I just get a different version of. Oh no, can you still see the slides as well now?
Now it's grey. Now I can see them. Yes, it's okay.
Right. Okay. So in terms of this, then what you've got on the screen is examples of how current events are being referenced in terms of digital ethics and healthy and well communities. Got the Black Lives Matter protests, and that's where we see examples of that kind of systemic racial bias coming through in terms of digital programming techniques. You've got a very recent example in the UK of an algorithm that was produced to predict exam grades. And I think anyone in England will say that that went fairly badly wrong. You've got examples of where councils are scrapping the use of algorithms in terms of making decisions about people's welfare and their benefits decisions and their claims. And you've also got an example of where facial recognition has been ruled unlawful by the police in a particular case. So these are all very current examples of where digital ethics meet the headlines effectively in terms of things. Does that make sense to everybody? Can everyone still see the slides rather than everything else? Great. Okay, so in terms of place, which is one of the things we want to talk about today, my patch, if you like, my local area is Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and there are several cities in that geography. Cambridge obviously being one, a very well-known city, international profile, university city. We also have Peterborough and Ely, and we also have some very rural places, some very small rural communities. And what we've seen with coronavirus is we've seen some significant changes in how people interact with us as local government and also how we deliver our services. We've seen a significant shift to home working. We've seen patterns of staff behaviour that have had to change, as has everybody's. We've also had to deal with data differently. And there's a couple of examples there. One is around the shielding data. So that's where we've had people who've been protecting themselves, shielding in their own homes. And that data has come to us in local government through a number of different routes. And we've had to deal with it very differently to normal data. We've also had to share data differently. In terms of the digital inclusion, we've found examples of where children from poorer backgrounds are being excluded from the opportunities to learn during lockdown because they don't have the same access to digital solutions as pupils from wealthier backgrounds. And that's widening the divide there. And homeschooling is a huge, huge issue. If you have space in your home and if you have the technology available to your children, that leads to one outcomes. If you don't have that, or if you have to work all the time and can't take time off to school them or to work from home, another set of outcomes. We've also seen how remote and virtual consultations and care come into their own in this space. And for COVID-19, we've also had the test and trace and outbreak management work to deal with as well as the recovery work from the pandemic. A lot of those things will be similar for everybody across the different locations. So myself, I've been in local government in England for over 20 years, and I've had several different roles. Currently, as Giorgio says, I'm the head of IT and digital for 3CICT. That just trips off the tongue. I'm the strategic IT lead for Cambridgeshire County Council and Peterborough City Councils. And I'm also the current Socatum president. Socatum, as you probably know, but if you don't, for anyone who's unfamiliar with it, it is a society of innovation, technology and modernisation. And as it says on the screen there, we aim to be the preferred network of professionals shaping and delivering public services. We're a policy-driven organisation, and that's in policies that are informed by our members. And each of those policies has a vice president or presidential or an immediate past president lead, so that we each have our portfolio of policies to progress. Healthy and well communities is my policy theme, and that's where we start to talk about poppies and donuts. And you might ask, why poppies and donuts? So healthy and well communities, it is all about improving the outcomes of people who live in a particular place. And we want to use digital technologies to create a left shift away from acute care, away from the hospitals, away from care homes, and into better outcomes for people living at home for longer and being more, having a greater well-being and being healthier overall. Poppies and donuts come into it in a couple of different ways. Poppies, they thrive in disturbed earth. And in the east of England, you do see a lot of those around the edges of fields. You see them in other countries as well, and they can be very symbolic and very resonant in lots of ways. The reason that I've included them in this presentation is because poppies, with the fact that they thrive in that disturbed earth, coronavirus has given us that as a metaphor. We've had to shake everything. We've had to move everything. Everything has changed around us. And that gives us some opportunities for unexpected things to come through and thrive in the way that poppies do. And donuts, well, that's where we start to talk about some of the bigger concepts, and we will talk about that more in the slides coming through. But essentially, what we're talking about here is a playful representation of the social and planetary aspects of our world, and you could describe an outer ring as being the planetary aspects and the inner ring being the more sociological bits. But that's why it's poppies and donuts. In terms of that donut analogy, this is where we look at that donut in a little bit more detail. So we have that ecological ceiling around the outside. And this is work that's referenced. Kate Rodston's work is what's being referenced here. And she has built on these planetary alignments coming through from other research. You see that in the middle, you've got that social foundation, and you've got the climate change, ocean acidification, and other things around the outside. So that's the donut model. And when we overreach, or when we overutilize the resources of our planet, that's when you start to see some of the things in the second half of this graphic. So you see the climate change, you see biodiversity loss, you see the land conversion, you see nitrogen and phosphorus loading. Those are things around the outside. And in the middle, you see shortages or pressure on water and other resources. And when you look at our health and our well-being around that middle, that's where you start to see the healthy and well communities mapped in that area. So for us in Societum, we're looking again at those digital aspects as to how we can change those things, how we can impact on the health and the well-being of our communities in the cities and in the places that we have, particularly in my patch. So what we've got in Societum is we've started to create a diagram or a graphic. It's a little bit blurry, so we're working on getting better definition. But in this, you can see the different themes of Societum coming through, the different policy areas that we saw on the previous slide. You've got leadership, diversity and skills running through there. We have modernising ICT. We have in the middle strand going up there, the ethical use of technologies, as well as service design and transformation. And at the top, right in the middle of that donut, we have our healthy and well communities policy theme. And in the green lines going through the bottom half of the graphic just shows the data insights and also the sustainability and green recovery that's important to us all. So that's our ethical digital placemaking model. When we start to talk about ethics, I think it is important to start with those definitions that you see here, and those moral principles that govern a person or a group's behaviour. And we've got the definitions on the slide here. For me, the second one of those really resonates. The ethics comes before the rules, during the rules, and after the rules. The core principles that we see from ethical practice, and this has been distilled down through a huge amount of looking at the relevant bits of research. William Barker's done a huge amount of work on this. But you've got those 5 themes that you see there: the beneficence, the non-malfeasance, the autonomy, justice, and then also, obviously, explicability. And we'll talk about those in a minute or two. But underpinning all of that, you again come back to the ethics. Comes before rules, during the rules, and after the rules. So on this slide, we talk a little bit more about those 5 principles. And I'm not going to go through this line by line, but for me, when I look at these, on the beneficence and the non-malfeasance, it is so important that those 2 things work together. It's not enough to just look at the risks of what it is you're doing. There has to be a benefit. There has to be a good coming from it as well. And equally, if you just look at the good and you don't look at the risks, then you don't see the whole picture either. And if we come back to one of those things that I was talking about in an earlier slide, the algorithm that was used in the UK to predict the exam results, I think that's where autonomy, justice, and explicability really, really resonate. Because it does seem, from the outside looking in, I wasn't around for creating the algorithm, but in terms of what we, the public, have seen, it looks like that algorithm didn't bring the stakeholders with it, or the people who were producing it did not involve the stakeholders in that risk assessment and in that design. In terms of the justice, be fair piece, again, it appears that that algorithm really failed on that measure. It did not appear to produce a fair outcome. And when we look at the kind of the operate transparently piece, it again, a fail for that algorithm. Certainly, if you look at it from the point of view of the staff, the pupils, the parents, it really doesn't seem to have worked. So they do appear to be some key measures by which you can judge the success of some of the things that are being done at the moment from a digital perspective. In terms of the work that Socotum are doing around this, we've got the signposting, Resource Hub, we'll come to that in a moment. We've also got a unique event that we'll be holding in St George's at Windsor Castle later on in the year. And that's going to be an opportunity for people to contribute to some research in this area, to consult on it further. We've got the model and the framework. And one of the things that we want to ensure is that what comes out of our research and out of our work is practical solutions that people can apply. And that's where the playbook comes in, that practical guidance for ethical approaches. The Resource Hub, I mentioned it previously. Resource Hub is something that is available on Socotum's website generally. There's 1 or 2 of the items on there, the newer items, that will be for members only, but there's a huge amount of resources that are available freely. And this slide just shows some of the categories that we're using in terms of that digital ethics resource. Then we come on to more of what we're going to be doing during the year, and this is we want to champion that ethical practice, and we want to kind of hold briefings, and these are some of the areas that we will be looking to hold briefings on. And again, you'll see the reference to those principles, those 5 principles that we were talking about earlier. And then on that theme of being practical, again, if we look at learning the lessons, there are some crucial steps when assessing algorithms. And let's be clear, there's more to digital transformation and more to ethical debates than talking about algorithms, but it is a really practical example of something that's happened recently. So it can't just be a tick box exercise. You need to look at things forensically. And you have to understand, is that proposed approach proportionate and ethical? Plan that testing rigorously with relevant data. And also underpin questioning and testing with those robust sets of checks and balances to make sure you get that governance. And I would say, crucially, executive scrutiny as well as stakeholders as well. So then we come to the last of the slides, and it's on this we have a number of big questions. So how do we understand and promote the ethical use of emerging technologies? Big questions there. What do we mean by ethics and how do we apply them? Happy to discuss those questions and more in the Q&A session, Giorgio.
These are, I agree, these are key questions. So I suggest the following. You have finished, right, your presentation?
Yeah, that's the last one.
So what I propose is the following. If there are very specific questions from the participants, they are welcome to ask now. Otherwise, we keep it for the debate after the second presentation. Okay.
Sounds good.
So, is there any specific question that you want to be clarified about in some charts, or otherwise we keep all the questions at the end? Okay.
Sure.
Any questions? Welcome, William. I see you could join. Okay, thank you. So I please unshare your presentation, and now and also you. So Chris, you can start.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Let me share my slides. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Chris Bamberger. I'm part of the HCI group here at the Technical University of Vienna, TU Wien in Austria. And the title of my presentation is What Do Smart Cities Do with People and Cities More Generally? So just to give you a background, I'm a computer scientist who kind of goes social and philosophical in many ways. And every year I teach around 750 people who come into our informatics bachelor's program. And these first year students, we teach in various classes, and one of them has to do with responsibility and responsible thinking. And I want to start with a slide that I try to show them as often as I can. Basically, the message here is, if you are a technologist and if you're creating the technological futures that we're going to live in, later on to say, I just did the tech will not be good enough. And this is to say that we all bear some responsibility what we bring into this world. And particularly technologists have had a history of kind of, stepping back from their creations and saying, well, I just did the tech and you can do whatever you want with it. And I don't think that was ever true, but it's particularly not true with digital technology. And with the entanglements between our own lives and the significance of digital technologies in them, I think that that power of digital technologies in our lives has become really very much present. So we kind of hope that these future computer scientists kind of go out and take that slide to their hearts and think about what they bring to the life and what they bring into this world. I want to start maybe the argument with a very old example, and this kind of underpins the argument that this is not entirely only a digital phenomenon, but has been present before. Robert Moses was a city planner and an architect in the 60s in New York, and he was famous for building a lot of highways and bridges around the city. And he was particularly controversial also because he built some of the bridges which kind of were used by streets that went to the prettiest beaches of New York in a way that would not be suitable to buses. And at the time, this was a very effective way of racial segregation. Everybody who had access to their own car, which was mainly kind of white middle class, could go to the nice beaches. Everybody who was relying on public transport was actually stuck. It's a bit of a murky story. Nobody really could say whether he did that on purpose. He was not confessing to that in any public way. All that is known is that he had actually quite some outdated views even by that time. And what this example shows really nicely is that whatever we design changes power structures in our societies. And I think this is an example and a message that we can take forward to the digital age. Quite inversely, it's obviously at the moment really interesting that now it's not the buses that wouldn't fit under these bridges, but it's the big wealthy people in their SUVs that have troubles fitting through. But very similar stories we can read in the newspaper basically every day. The racism of technology, Sam already had a slide on that in her presentation, is quite obvious. You're more likely to be hurt by an autonomous vehicle if you're black than if you're white. This is the accompanying study that showed this. So while people argue in a utilitarian ethics way that, you know, on average our safer maybe with autonomous vehicles, that safety gain is unequally distributed, and that should be a major concern and reason for us to stop and think what we're doing. How are we shifting the power balances by introducing that kind of technology? And obviously, there are many, many other stories around this. These are slides by a colleague of mine, Casey Fiesler from the US, and she said it's never been so easy to kind of fill her slides with stories of technology companies that got something wrong. There was Unroll Me, WhatsApp. There was a famous Facebook study that predicted the mood of people and manipulated them. There was Amazon, there was facial recognition that we just talked about. And of course, there was Cambridge Analytica and the manipulation of elections. Sorry. So all these kind of examples kind of show that, of course, technology has reached into every corner of our lives. And of course, also, I heard we have somebody from Toronto here who would be probably more qualified to talk about this. But the sidewalk disaster in Toronto probably was also is quite significant and is a good example for what can go wrong. And one obviously catchword that is linked to this is the term of surveillance capitalism that I want to talk about a little later more. But there are other things that we thought were good ideas at the time when we introduced them, for example, predictive policing. And this is a really interesting study that showed how predictive policing is actually causing a spiral and a self-fulfilling prophecy in communities that these communities are really struggling to kind of escape. So if you put more police on the streets, the crime rate goes up, and because of the crime rate goes up, they're putting more police on the streets, and so there is a real cost to communities. So it says here, over-policing imposes real costs on these communities. Increased police scrutiny and surveillance have been linked to worsening mental and physical health. So it's actually producing outcomes that were not intended, but certainly manifested in digital technologies. This is a really interesting one. It's Donald Trump last year saying that we could use maybe Fitbit data to stop mass shootings in the US. And I find this interesting because I'm pretty sure that he didn't have that idea himself, but it was put to him as from his technological advisors and say like, oh, we have all this data. We could actually identify potentially mentally unstable people and then be extra strict on them in terms of like gaining weapons or being able to kind of purchase weapons. And this, of course, is a very classical example of rushing in to kind of solve a problem on the surface by its brutal technological force, while totally ignoring what lies underneath. So people have stopped looking at the problems, but they're just exclusively looking at solutions. And I think this is one of the main lessons that technologies need to learn, that we need to kind of think much more about problems than about solutions. So Shoshana Zuboff kind of wrote this really highly recommended book on the age of surveillance capitalism. I'm pretty sure you all have at least heard of it. And she has this one graphic in there that I find explains very much the current system. It's not just a technological system, of course, it's this economic system and also a cultural system, a market system, how we kind of got into a circle where companies are not only trying to kind of collect data to improve their own services, but there is a behavioral surplus, which is the name for the product that kind of falls out of the circle, that is being sold to the real customers of the Googles and the Apples and the Microsofts and the Amazons. And this behavioral surplus is the real product. It's not us. They're not, the real making the product better for us is a side product to the real product. And this kind of inversion of who is the customer is really powerful in understanding what is driving this surveillance capitalism and how data is being weaponized. Last year, I was at the IoT week in Aarhus in June when traveling was still a thing. It was quite interesting to see what people kind of came up with. IoT was in everybody's kind of mind, and there was a huge industrial fair. A lot of small companies and also big companies kind of showed in which ways they were thinking that IoT would kind of transform their businesses, open up new business opportunities, and digitalization was the thing. So there were two observations that I made that really struck with me. The one was everybody had the UN sustainability goals somewhere on their slides. And I thought that was an interesting thing to say or to do. Because it showed that at least responsibility has made its way somewhere into the mainstream of technologists and IoT people. The other number that really stuck with me was the number of 125 billion. This is the number of connected IoT devices that the industry estimates will exist by 2030. So 125 billion connected IoT devices. This is at the time, if you believe the predictions of population, it's about 15 devices per person. And that includes every person on the planet. And I found this, everybody was tooting this as a major success. This is how powerful the industry will be, right? And I found it's like, this is really interesting because what are these 15 kind of devices per person doing? And I thought like maybe, it solves a problem in terms of unemployment because somebody has to change the batteries in them and maintain them. That's going to, make a lot of work available for a lot of people. But the impact is enormous. There's a famous Facebook study where somebody researched how much you could actually tell about a person by only looking at their 60 at their last 60 likes on Facebook, and you can pretty much determine their sexual orientation, their gender, their political views pretty accurately. Now, just think about what you could tell about everybody if everybody was surrounded by at least 15 devices. And there's another element to this, right? A lot of these IoT devices are spreading the data pretty wildly. This is a study that bought some IoT devices and looked just like where is all the traffic going. And there were a lot of third-party companies that these devices just distributed some information. And encryption is not really solving that problem because it's not, the encryption part is part of the problem, but it's not the only problem. The problem is that it's just distributed so widely. So if we lose control of the data that's being collected about us in our environment, it's a really quite frightening and dystopian future that we're headed if we can't break the surveillance capitalism system behind it. There's another element to this, of course. If you create 125 billion IoT devices in the world, this has a massive ecological footprint. So there's a tsunami of data, as this article kind of calls it. by now, people estimate that the internet has surpassed aviation and shipping combined. In electrical usage, and is at the moment, with the growth rates predicted to be surpassing 14% by 2040. This is a Berkeley report that in 2016 estimated how many nuclear power plants we need to build just to fire our data centers, and that's not just the energy that our senses would collect. It's the actual storing and processing of the data that is costing the most energy. This is a story from last year where MIT kind of calculated. You would need to kind of go into the actual study. Of course, AI models are not, there's not one AI model. You could do that in various ways, but it's quite indicative, actually, to kind of think of like training a single AI model can emit as much carbon as 5 cars in their lifetimes. And if you think about the number of AI models that are being built for all sorts of purposes, this is a whole industry. So I want to talk quickly a little bit about just beyond the dystopian stories that I told right now, about strategies to go into the future. So public power is a thing. I think we often perceive ourselves as customers and passive receivers of digitalization, and that's a big mistake, I think, because the public has power, and of course, one of the examples of how this public power became apparent was how Google was forced to kind of stop their project, the Sidewalk Labs in Toronto. I'm not saying this was the only reason that they actually stopped it, but and that is a much more complicated story. But there was quite some significant public resistance that certainly helped that decision. You probably have heard that IBM is no longer developing a research in facial recognition technology, and that's also a thing that probably was driven by increasing level of public uneasiness with facial recognition technologies, but also, by stories like this, where San Francisco has banned facial recognition within their city boundaries, and that kind of goes to show that that also regulatory power is really useful as a strategy to shape digitalization and shape the digitalization in a way that we think is good for society. But also research power. I think we need a lot more research that looks into intended and unintended outcomes of technological inventions. This is Joy Bulamini, who also founded the Algorithmic Justice League. And it was her study that really caused companies like Amazon and IBM to revise their facial recognition algorithms and maybe also in parts put a moratorium on them. And this is just one slide out of her work. She did that as a thesis at the MIT, where just training that facial recognition at Amazon, you got like 100% accuracy in judging the gender with lighter males, but it's a quite shockingly low 68.6% accuracy with darker females. So, and these things have real consequences in terms of like people being stopped for being mistaken for somebody else, and people having real troubles. And this is the systemic racism that is built into digital technology that Sam also referred to. But also, I think we need more debate. Thinking about the one piece of technology that, at least in Europe, was at the center of the debate in terms of digital technology during the pandemic was the tracing app. So digital tracing of COVID-19 cases, obviously in every country that has been done slightly differently. And then Google and Apple kind of got together and kind of implemented that in a pretty good way, I think, privacy preserving way in their operating systems. But the real interesting question is even if Google and Apple get privacy right, is there still something wrong with this? And I think this is the right question to ask. Is the society a society that we want to live in, where we can do this tracing, and is the balance between our own freedoms, our own health, and the health of the public, is that balance right? Is that a debate? And I'm not really kind of falling on either or. I'm just saying here that it's really, really important that we have these conversations. And this was one of the points where I think the pandemic kind of laid a few things bare that we now are in a position of debating. I mean, Google and Apple have done these things all along for many, many years for very different purposes. And now all of a sudden we can actually talk about whether we think that's right or not. And I think there's also something around the narrative. This is a video by Samsung about an idyllic kind of future in the city. And a lot of these kind of promises of what the smart city is and how it kind of impacts our lives and makes it so much shinier and better. And I think the narrative so far has really been very one-sided in both directions. Both utopias and dystopias have been quite lame. I think we need more gray shadows in terms of like how can technological futures really look like, and how can we envision that in ways that are meaningful to people. It's just these ideas are just technological features looking for a problem. Manifestos are another thing that have sprung up in the past 2 years, and of course, one of them is the Vienna Manifesto on Digital Humanism, which I was involved in a couple of workshops where this kind of was created with a number of colleagues from overseas. I think a lot of these manifestos, and this is not the only ones, and these are many others, for example, they are really important because they recognize that we want to do something. There's a political agenda behind signing a manifesto. One of the things that I'm still missing is, what does that actually mean? What does digital humanism mean? What kind of humanism do we actually mean when we talk about digital humanism? These are all really burning questions. And I don't think that we're anywhere near knowing how that would be translated into the actual creation and design of technology. So there's even a paper that kind of does a meta review on all manifestos, which I find quite interesting. The last thing that I want to kind of point out, I think we need to recognize participation as a power that is really important. We need to kind of find arenas where we can meaningfully configure participation of people who are affected by digital tools and digitalization more in general. I think we need to kind of move away from that narrative that digitalization is made elsewhere and we just have to get fit for it. I think we need to kind of regain some authority over creating and designing our digitalization and our digital futures. And that is a quite difficult task. And it's part of my research to kind of experiment with some digital formats and non-digital formats to negotiate agendas. One of the things that we do is the Parliament of Smart Things. How can we actually, create some formats in which people are perspective taking, understand other people's concerns? How can we actually talk about technology as a future thing and then negotiate what kind of future we want? And how can we bridge these debates, these very political debates, with the actual development processes of technology? So I want to end with this, and thank you for your presentation. I'm happy to kind of discuss all of that, and I'm looking forward. May the force be with you.
Thank you, Chris. So I will open now the floor for discussions. I think there is plenty to discuss about. By the way, I'm quite frightening about your presentations. I hope nobody of the participants will resign today and change their job, as we are all IoT people. I'm not managing local governments, but all of them are doing that. And well, it is a big responsibility, a big change in the profession to manage such issues. So before going to that, maybe Martin, you want to say something about what are your plans for a specific event that you wish to invite everybody, and then we go to the questions. Okay, Martin, would you like to take over? Moment. Are you still in, Martin? No. Okay.
He's still there, but I think he's just having trouble muting, the same as I was earlier.
Oh, can you present it, Sam? You know what it is about, right?
Just give Martin another second. No, in that case, it's an invitation to join Socatum's Share National event, which is on the 24th and 25th of September. And the theme of that event is around digital ethics. And the host will be our newest vice president, who's Mark Lumley. He'll be hosting the event for 2 days.
So I will after this this call, we will send a report, and in the report I will send the invitation with all the information on how to join. Everybody is welcome to join. So now let's go to the questions. Please start. Who is the brave guy who would start? No, don't tell me that it's me. I will not ask any question. Okay.
I see Sandra and Sven.
Yeah. I can't find my hand to put up on the screen.
Hello. Yes, please take the floor, please. Yes.
Yeah, I thought that was an absolutely fascinating presentation. I really like that, and it is so important really to sort of raise the profile of sort of unintended consequences of what we design, and to consider people from diverse backgrounds. I mean, I think that's absolutely spot on. And I also thought it was really important about the focusing on the problems and not the solutions, because how many times have we said, we've got solutions looking for problems? We get that all the time in tech, and actually we should be focusing on what the actual issues are rather than just trying to tout up, shiny bits of tech. So I thought that was really, really insightful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
More of a statement than a question.
Now, Martin, I don't know why you don't want to ask your question right immediately, but anyway, you were writing something on your chat. It would be easy to be pessimistic about the future of our cities, given the impact and the pervasiveness of emerging technologies. Chris talks about regulation, research, participation, manifestos, etc. What is the responsibility of major cities of Europe members, if any, for promoting the debate? Now, this is a key question. I have the same. I wanted to ask the same, because in reality, we are IoT people, but we are not IoT. We are IT people, and we are supposed to have the skills and capability to understand the topics that Sam and Chris were presenting, and change it into and transform what the knowledge we have into inputs for the political agenda of our cities. Is it correct what I'm saying? Does anybody agree on that? Is it the role of the CIO to be driving let's say the understanding of what is happening into the reality of the strategies of cities?
I want to just quickly respond to that. Responsibility is something that is quite complex, and I think we need to kind of move away to kind of making any single person responsibility for something. I think we can be responsible for our intentions. I think we can being responsible for for negligence, of not thinking about unintended consequences. I think that's all true, but it's very hard to kind of be responsible for something solely. So, everybody has some responsibility. CIOs have responsibility in thinking digitalization, but you cannot kind of just give them all the responsibility and just as a citizen say like, well, he's responsible for all that. I think, and this is also something that I tell my students, technologists will never create things that are only used in the ways that they intend them to use it. It will always be misused in one way or another. You can also kill somebody with a hammer, and you could drive a nail into a board by using a gun. That doesn't mean that creating a gun is not done with a very different intention than creating a hammer. So I think what we need to learn is that we all share a common responsibility for the futures that we create, and that we all kind of have opportunities to shape them. So my opportunity to shape them is to speak to 700 future computer scientists every year. And even if just like half of them remembers what they heard in their first year of their studies, that's quite an impact. And my leverage is giving talks like this and talking to people who have different positions and giving them some insights or making them alert to certain aspects of technology that they might not have thought about before. So no single person is responsibility, I think. Everybody is responsible for doing their thing and within their position.
Thank you.
I would like to ask a few questions, if possible.
Yes, please.
2 questions to Sam and to Chris. You mentioned the 5 principles of ethics. To what extent technological companies implement this kind of ethics? And my second question is, I didn't understand well. You try to explain the connection between health, well-being, and digital. And I would like you to add a few points. And a question to Chris, how it is possible to humanize technology in smart cities?
So Sam, you can start.
Certainly. So the question about health and well-being, taking the second one first, health and well-being and digital, it is one of the areas that we're working to shape at the moment, because healthy and well communities is such a large area to consider that's actually what we're looking at the moment, is how to ensure that we focus on the digital elements of that so that we as IT professionals can actually make a difference. And we're seeing some areas there in particular around what we can do with data, how that can help. So we've got some interesting work going on about how we can help to use data differently in terms of the modeling and the kind of some of the predictions, so that we can help potentially help people intervene at an earlier stage in someone's life. So if you can predict or use data to show you when something might happen or how to avoid something happening for someone, then the theory is that you can avoid them going into care, for example, or being admitted into hospital. And there's also other uses of data. There's many ways in which we could use data better to help improve the outcomes of people and help to improve the situation of communities and cities. But also we're looking at things like automation, and that's something again where we could use that technology, so the digital element of something, to improve how services are delivered to residents in a particular community. That also may help to improve their health and their well-being outcome there. So there's a few different things. There's also things like actually better systems and better access to things through digital tools. But you're right, the connections aren't easy, and it's one of the areas we're working on at the moment is to bring that down. In terms of your first question, I think was around how much we think that the technology companies are utilizing those 5 principles. I can't say can't speak for them all, but I think that's an area where we need to encourage them to improve a lot. I think that it's a very new area for some. Certainly, when we're talking to the people who supply the systems for local government in England, I think a conversation with them about ethics and those 5 principles would be a conversation that they look at us and go, I don't really understand what you mean. So I think we will have to work with them to educate them on that. I think there's a long way to go, would be my view.
Yeah, thank you.
Chris?
Yeah, can I just quickly connect to that last question as Sam answered the question? I think from my experience, and there's a study in Australia that showed that for technology companies, they really want to kind of be more ethical, don't know how. So there seems to be like an urge for them to kind of have a list of ethical things that they need to do. And that's the problem with ethics. Ethics is nothing that you can do a checkbox exercise of. I think ethics is a very complicated and situated and dialectic process. And this is what makes it more of a culture or a stance than a practice. I think it would be quite hard for kind of educating somebody to be more ethical. I think that's going to backfire quite badly, because then people kind of are just doing what they're told. But that's not ethical conduct, because ethical conduct is thinking about your own values and your own moral beliefs and debating whether these beliefs or morals are shared with your community or your society, and what then that means for your actions is a thing that has been debated for thousands of years. So I don't think that's very easy to kind of educate people on ethics. I think it really is much more of a culture shift, and how to bring that culture shift about, I think, is a more complicated question. To the question that you directed to me, can we humanize technology in smart cities? I think that's also a complicated question, because as we create, or as you would say, humanize these technologies will change who we are. So there's a circle. We're certainly a different kind of species since we have smartphones, right? It has changed us as a human being. And in similar ways, we're bringing things, and digital technology in particular, into this world. And these things are making us different human beings. So there's a circle of mutual dependency that is really hard to design, because it's, where to start. So my question there would be, and this is also my problem slightly with the term digital humanism. Do we really want to kind of base everything on the human, or do we find a way to kind of maybe step back and say, like, or maybe is this a part of the bigger picture? Can we afford to be human-centered, or do we need to be planet-centered, or do we need to be species-centered? These are all ethical questions, and these need to be bridged with the kind of technological developments that we're trying to do. So maybe trying to kind of answer your question, I don't think that we need to humanize technology. I think we need to find ways to develop the technology that we want, which is not the same. Maybe saying it slightly different, I think we need to develop the kind of technology that makes us the humans that we want to be. Maybe that's the way to frame it in the best, to frame it best.
I'm telling you why I'm asking this question, because last month the question that I asked you was published as an article in one of the international magazines. And I had a confession there I'm not a technology. I tell everybody that I'm from the X generation, not like most of you here that are younger than me. And I face always, let's say, a problem with different kind of technology. I'm using computer and things like that, but sometimes I'm going on the society, the human track, because there are a lot of excluded population. They don't have any access to technology. And I always thinking what they can do to, let's say, better their quality of life. Technology is an enabler. It's not, let's say, the solution or the condition that you have to work or manage your life accordingly. I mean, you can use it in transportation, connected your local municipality, going to different Google articles, whatever. And this question is occupied me very much.
A very short response to this. I think we're already very much what our tools made us, right? Starting from the fire to the car, to the hammer, to the smartphone. The things that we created for us have already kind of shaped who we are to a great extent. So the question really is, what do we want to create for us to become who we want to be? And you know, it's easy to say that, you know, we don't want this or that technology, or but the real questions is more of a philosophical, maybe, and political questions. What kind of society do we want to be, and what does that mean for the tools that we bring into that society?
Okay, thank you.
Giorgio, I think you're on mute still. If you were talking just then.
I said thank you, Chris. And is there anybody else that want to raise some other points to discuss?
I see Lars, and then Isabella. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Ladies first. Isabella, you can unmute yourself if you wish.
Thanks a lot for the great presentations. Really awesome and inspiring. And my question is about like going beyond the ethics, the personal ethics, into a personal responsibility. And we see that all professions that have a certain responsibility for society or pose a threat to society are required to a certain like oath or some legal framework. Would you see the same for IT? Would that make sense?
Whom you would like to answer your question?
This goes to both. I mean, both Sam and Chris. Anybody else also. I think it's a question for everyone.
Sam, you want to start? Unmute yourself, please.
So annoying when you get that wrong. Anyway, so sorry, Isabella. In terms of your question, is it that you want to know if legal boundaries should apply to IT professionals around the area of ethics? I wasn't sure I understood. Sorry.
Yeah, if you think that it would make sense to go this direction, or if you have heard of any initiatives going that direction, given the responsibility that AI or IT in general is like confronted with, actually. Would that make sense? It's just a philosophical question at the moment. Yeah.
So is it philosophical rather than actual? I'll be honest, I haven't heard of any examples of where it's been where that has come into law. I don't know if other people on the call, I know, William, you've done a huge amount more research in this area than I have, for sure. So if you know, you'll know better than I do. You're also muted at the minute, though, just to be clear. Oh, no, you are.
Any other comment to Isabella's point?
Yeah, you can hear me all right. Good.
Yes.
First of all, thanks, Isabella. That's really a key point. I think the reality, a couple of things that come out of the conversation today, I think very much the recognition that CIO community, tech community is part of the leadership community in public sector, private sector, and that those of you in a leadership role, whatever you are, whether you're accountants, statisticians, whatever, technologists, there is a collective responsibility role on these issues, and it is working towards that collective responsibility that I think underpins the way we should be holding those philosophical conversations. To be more specific, the work that we've been doing in Socratim and that I've been working very closely with Martin and his team on, is that I would agree there is a marked gap in the ICT IT profession around coming to terms with the digital technology and data ethics agenda in a form of codified guidance or whatever. What I've seen is organizations like ACM in the United States, some of the social care profession groups in the United States, colleagues with Europe in some organizations have started to codify what shall we say, the key attributes of ethical practice are in relation to the handling of technology and data. And most recently in the United Kingdom, I'm sure you will have followed, and I know Sam in the presentation picked up on it, the recent hiatus we've had, particularly around algorithmic decision making, both in local government and also particularly in our education system. Our whole university assessment system went through major problems over the last few weeks due to the solution that was applied. What we are beginning to see is professional bodies like the Royal Society of Statisticians and the Royal Society of Chartered Actuaries in the United Kingdom starting to codify much more around what ethical practice is in regards to the use of data, stats and the like. So I think it's an emerging picture, but is one that perhaps collectively we, over the coming months, need to start to consolidate into models and frameworks that we can actually start to use as a means of taking forward into these conversations that we will need to have not only amongst our peer group, but also with our collateral colleagues in the professional bodies and professional fields. I know a colleague of mine who's done some work on this, Paul Waller, is on the call as well. And Paul shared with me some of the stuff that's been coming out of New South Wales government around this only yesterday, which is very innovative around addressing these issues. So there is stuff out there. It is the task, I think, in coming months for a number of us to start to try and...
Yeah, I just want to say
that helps.
Just want to say, yeah, there is the ACM Code of Conduct, of course, and the similar thing is true for IEEE for IT professionals. And IEEE also has started to kind of work on a standard on ethically aligned design, which is an effort that has been done for 1.5 years now, and I think that they're starting to kind of put out guidance for professionals how to do this. I'm intrigued by the idea of oath because I think it needs change on many levels, right? On a very high level, I think GDPR was a very powerful example that regulation can bring about change. I don't think that everything is right with GDPR. Many things went wrong, but it was a quite powerful example of how European regulation kind of had a worldwide effect on data privacy. And I mean that in a most positive way. And on a professional level, you know, things like standards can play a role, but they're all nullified by people who do a checkbox exercise out of ethics. Ethics is particularly prone to being misused in that way because it's not about, you know, getting your security protocol right. It's not something that you can step through and then be ethical. I think it's much more, and is much more intrinsic to our own being in the world to be ethical. So just like doctors, you know, it would be an idea to kind of swear an oath and say, like, I do my best to kind of make the world better as a technologist. I think this is an oath that everybody should swear anyway. But the thing is, it needs change on many different levels. There's no single, you know, golden bullet with which you can just solve that problem. Ethics is just not something like that. It's not a problem that you can just kill off with something. I think it's a way of being, and I think we need to kind of move collectively into that way of being. There's ethical, you know, being ethical as a consumer, as a user. There's being ethical as a governance body. There's being ethical as a technologist. All of these things are complicated and part of a being together in many ways, right? So I don't think that an oath for technologies is anywhere in sight, but I certainly think that, you know, that is related to the kind of culture change that I referred to earlier, and certainly not the worst idea, or kind of making that change happen.
Thank you, Chris. I have a comment or maybe a question. We have this conversation today in September. We're still in the middle of the pandemic, although it seems a little bit lighter, but I wouldn't like to say that louder. Now, what is the difference between the discussion we are having today and the same discussion we could have had 1 year ago? Is there anything that COVID has changed in this kind of topics? What do you think? Should we consider that, or should we forget about it?
I think it has made some difference. I think it brought the role of digital technologies much more to the awareness of people, and in doing so, the conversation then about how they're used and why they're used and the ethics of using them is closer to the surface for the public than it was before. I think there has been that shift.
Yeah, I agree. I think, as Sam said in her presentation as well, I think the pandemic laid a lot of things bare that were invisible previously. I think, you know, there are new digital divides that became visible in homeschooling children, in healthcare, and in many other areas where all of a sudden we were all pushed into, you know, a digitalization that was necessary at the time, but also kind of made us aware that with that digitalization, we were restructuring some of the power structures of our society, and that's a really almost useful exercise for us to understand what power digital technology has, and it opens spaces for discussion as well. Just like with the tracing apps, you know, if somebody, after this thing is over, if somebody starts asking, hold on a minute, we kind of stopped this tracing app because we were concerned about our privacy. How can we allow Google to kind of have an operating system that is doing that and much more? Right? How can we allow that?
I agree, and I think that if you think of some of that test and trace, you've got situations where I've heard anecdotally that people are turning off location data on their phone because they don't want Google to know where they've been. They may or may not trust that Google will share it, but they don't want Google to know, so that there can't be a question of them sharing it, and therefore they can't be picked up on that kind of tracing. Now, that we could say that's, you know, edging towards paranoid, maybe not, but it's coming through, it's filtering into some of the conversations. But I also think that there's a positive in some areas. So we've seen some people not interact with services digitally now doing so, and that means that things are more accessible to them than they were before. And also people have started to use technology differently. If you think of Zoom Pilates classes, Zoom yoga, Zoom art classes, I mean, so it doesn't matter whether it's Zoom or something else, but you have people interacting with people differently than we did before, and that again changes how people think and use technology, and the ethics of that conversation come with.
Do you think that people are more interested in sharing, discussing as a community about those kind of issues we are discussing? Is the community, so we know social works, social networks, a lot of people talking about everything. Okay, forget. Now, the meaning of a community is something different, or something, let's say, more specific in the field that we are touching, which is really about how people can interfere, suggest, etc., etc. Is there any big role in creating communities inside the administration among employees and outside the administration among citizens? Do you have an idea about what it could mean?
Some big questions to be asking there. I think that it is really important that, I think Chris was talking about the fact that earlier that everybody has a role to play in terms, no individual person is responsible, that we all are, and I think that's true. I was reflecting when Chris was talking about that earlier, and this may or may not be relevant to you, Georgia, in terms of your question, but actually when we're delivering public services, I think we have more of a responsibility than individuals do, and I think we have, with that responsibility, we should include the people who we're doing it for. So I do think that there is absolutely a role for bringing the people who will receive our services and use our services. We should bring them into that conversation.
Any comments? Okay, so we have 7 minutes to close our session, but we are not forbidden to close it before. Is there any other question or points to be raised? I think it was a very good discussion, isn't it? Yes, I have one more point. I think, Sam, you mentioned about educating people. People are citizens, people are employees of the administration, and in my opinion, even I wouldn't say most importantly, but it's at least at the same level, politicians. Now, I have never worked for a local government. I was working for IBM all my life, and then I'm leading major cities of Europe. But I know the story as being on the two sides, and I can tell you, if a politician hosts a presentation from any major company or startup with a fantastic solution, he will call the CIO and say, "Hey, I want it to be run at the city," which is all right. But I come back to my point. The role of the CIO is really difficult to manage this kind of request, because of course it is fascinating to have cars that can drive by themselves and so on. Fine. And so what? How can we educate politicians? That's what I mean, because the strategies and priorities come from them, right?
Very true. And they also want things that are going to win them votes and get them re-elected. Because that's part and parcel of being a politician.
Absolutely. Show that they are doing something, right?
Absolutely. And it's not easy to convince any politician to take a longer view than they might want to. So I think you're right. There is a tendency for them to say, there's a new shiny thing over there that will make my residents quite happy and make me look good, but equally there are lots and lots of politicians who do want to make a difference, and they do want to invest in their communities and make them better. So I think it is difficult. That it does depend on what they want and what those individual politicians, what drives them, and then understand how much of a conversation you can have with them and how much progress you will make with them. So and I choose to believe that the majority of the politicians who work in the local government do so because they want to make a difference at the end of the day, and therefore that's the angle that I would take is that what we all want to do is make a difference to our communities, and having ethical conversations and having that as part of our digital work is part of that for me.
Mm. Yeah, I also would say that this is politics for you. You know, different people do politics for different reasons, and that's always been the case. And politics is hard. It's just you need to kind of stick with it for as long as possible, and it's not so much that you can convince everybody that your idea is the best or this is ethical and this is not, but Chantal Mouffe kind of said that the dialectic conflict, that the agonism in politics is its very raison d'être. It's the very reason why politics exists. So I think just having a political debate and being of different opinions is already politics, and that's what we need to kind of keep doing.
I think that it has to be changed. I mean, not top down, but bottom up. I think the bottom have a lot of power. Otherwise, those politicians wouldn't be elected anymore. And I think it has to start from bottom up and go up.
I really kind of need to object to that. It's the same story with customers. Customers have a lot of power over companies because they don't need to kind of buy the stuff, right? And that's not true. You cannot not buy a Google phone, because even if you don't buy a Google phone, you have a shadow profile on Facebook and Google anyway. And there are certain powers that we have, but it's not entirely big. And I kind of also have to say I have problems with kind of they politicians and we. We can all be politicians if we want, and we need to kind of get involved into that. It's to kind of push that kind of responsibility down to the users and to the citizens is a really dangerous path to take. As people say, even Hitler was elected, right?
Yeah, you're right. So I'm sorry, but
sorry.
we have it's 5:28. We are not obliged to stop here, but maybe you have other things to do now. So I suggest that we close here the conversation. If you have any other comments or questions to the speakers or to each other, send them to me. I will forward to them, and maybe we can continue the conversation. As I mentioned, we have recorded the whole session, and our friend Elena, who is in the webinar, is going to write a report of it, and you will get the whole recording, report, and all the handouts so that you can review that. Or I would suggest share it with your colleagues that might be interested in sharing it. I wish to thank you so much. I think my impression was that it was a really good discussion. We didn't solve the issues of the world. The opposite, we create a lot of issues that we don't know all the answers, or probably no answer, but our role is to put things on the table and try to understand. Now, coming back to the scope of why we have decided to have this topic today as a discussion, I think this is having in mind those kind of topics is really something relevant to present new strategies after the COVID on how to leverage these technologies, how to introduce them effectively and ethically. So thank you so much. If you want to send feedbacks or any comments, they are very welcome. You have my email, and if you want to talk, I will be pleased to talk, and I'm sure that our speakers will be pleased to have other conversations if you want to. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, George.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Goodbye.